Confessions of a Puppet Master, a Hollywood memoir of ghouls, guts, and gonzo filmmaking. This is an autobiography written by Full Moon Features and Empire Pictures head honcho Charles Band. Now, for those of you who don't know who Charles Band is, he's the guy behind many 80s and 90s direct-to-video horror classics, Reanimator, the Puppet Master franchise. Those are probably the films that he's most notable in producing, but he's done over 200 total throughout his career. Charles Band is sort of a clearance rack Roger Corman in a way. He took a lot of the things that Corman pioneered and maxed out his talent for showmanship and salesmanship to sort of, undeniably, he sort of made a permanent name for himself in the annals of horror film history. But Band, for whatever reason, is never really put on that same level as Roger Corman. It's like his films just sort of flew a bit too under the radar culturally. Didn't quite have the level of insanely famous people who came through his operations like Corman ultimately did. And, whereas Corman directed a lot of really well-respected films, such as the Edgar Allan Poe films he did in the 60s, Charles Band never really had that. Charles Band directed things, but it was never anything that was like people point to as that is a great piece of art sort of thing. So this book, though, is really good. Charles Band, love him or hate him, has an everyman quality to his writing style. He sort of fills that first half of the book with lots of cool stories about his days living in Rome, being on movie sets with his dad, creating Empire Pictures, sleeping with Demi Moore before she was famous, buying a castle, pretty much living a rock star lifestyle during the high point of his career. So, he was making millions of dollars doing all these movies in the 80s, but Band also doesn't shy away about how he screwed it all up. I mean, he owns it. He says, yeah, I botched all of this stuff. From reading this, I sort of get the sense that Band is, in his heart of hearts, a good-natured con man, and I mean that in the best way possible. He talks about his time as a kid in Rome, setting up an underground club, figuring out how to get money, and with Empire, it sort of sounds like it was just like an elaborate shell game of moving money around and going along for the ride as long as he could. He even admits in his book that he didn't really pay attention to the finances. He was just trying to sweet talk his way into more financing to make more movies, and, wasn't the best at paying attention to the details of being an actual businessman. He's not a good businessman, as he admits. He's just a good idea man making movies. That's what he loves to do. So I think he believed he could talk his way out of anything, and as this book sort of shows, he could not. So he also discusses the creation of Full Moon, and again, this guy was making millions only a couple years after Empire went bankrupt, because Puppet Master and those films were so successful on home video. I recently read It Came from the Video Aisle, which is also reviewed here on Outpost Unknown, so check that out. It's an incredible deep dive into the entire history of Full Moon, but one of the areas it shied away from was really going into detail on the reasons for the decline of Empire and Full Moon. Now, this book largely answers those questions, though if I have one real disappointment with the book, it's that the second half feels like it glosses over a lot of the stuff. So the 80s and early 90s were clearly the high point of Band's career, and it feels like he has so many more interesting stories, obviously, than when he's slumming around in the early 2000s trying not to go bankrupt again. So the book starts out super interesting and then just sort of peters out, but it's still really fascinating overall. And the reason why I'm a little bit disappointed is I like the stories of the struggle to keep your company afloat and not go bankrupt. Like, what did you have to do? Tell me how you utilized your wiles to save your company and sort of transition it more, like go into the nitty gritty. I mean, it's not like he doesn't address that stuff. It's just that he doesn't go into much detail about the mechanisms of how he pulled it all off. He had to sell some assets and things of that nature. I get it. But I want to know more about the struggles. I find that more fascinating than just, here's all these crazy stories of cool people that I hung out with early on. Now, there is one thing that I will disagree with on this book. It can't be avoided. This is just my own personal opinion of things that I saw. I've met Charles Band before. Charles Band has purchased one of my movies at a convention before, so I have interacted with this guy. Now, there's a part of the book towards the end where he talks about his Full Moon Roadshow. Now, this was a thing at conventions where Band would create a short film on stage. He'd get various people to come up and be characters. Band talks about making the audience part of the show in the book, and ultimately what this would end up being is a film called Titty Master. and the girl that was sort of selected had to show her boobs to the audience in the big finale to kill the monster or whatever. Now, Band addresses that there would be boobs in the book, but he kind of glosses over the fact that the film the girls were participating in was called Titty Master. He says that everybody sort of consented to that, but I was at multiple conventions at that time. I saw that roadshow a few different times. Putting girls up on stage in front of hundreds of dudes chanting for them to show their boobs isn't as consenty as he sort of makes it out to be in this book. It was certainly a different time in 2007, 2008, 2009. I'll just say that. But it is interesting now looking at how he describes that aspect of the Full Moon Roadshow in sort of this new sort of Me Too, cancel culture sort of realm that we're in now, how he sort of describes that. So I did feel like he kind of is putting the best spin on that sort of thing. But again, he does address it. So there is that. It's not like he completely doesn't mention the Full Moon Roadshow at all. But me, as someone who was in the audience with friends of mine who also confirm and agree, like this wasn't. I mean, I remember being very uncomfortable when it happened because you had all these dudes out there whipping out their phones, filming all of these girls, taking their tops off. And I remember having conversations with my friends at the time, just being like, it's a little awkward, it's a little weird, definitely problematic now, as my friend Rachel would say. Definitely problematic, but that's that. So overall, though, this is a really fun read. Charles Band has tons of stories, has a very conversational writing style, so you kind of get the sense that you're just sitting there with him at a convention shooting the shit about the glory days. If you grew up on Full Moon films like me, it's a must-read and an excellent companion piece to It Came from the Video Aisle. So again, go check out that review of that book. That book's like 500 pages, and it dives way further into the making of the specific films than this book. But it's good to sort of see Charles Band's perspective, and his perspective isn't super utilized in It Came from the Video Aisle. So I will give this a solid B.